Episode 4 of Barton County Christmas.
Snow had been in the forecast all week, like a rumor that wouldn't commit. By Christmas Eve, it finally bothered to show up, drifting down in slow. Lazy flakes that didn't cover much, but made everything look a little softer. Like the town was trying one more time to clean itself up before the year ended. Frank nudged the garage door up just enough to call it open. Cold air slipped along the floor in a thin line, but the rest of the garage stayed warm under the glow of the patio heater. It was parked dead center, humming gently, sending a steady curtain of heat downward. Right underneath it, Larson lay flattened on his side, wrapped in his green sweater. Legs stuck out behind him like someone had dropped a sack of concrete and decided to knit a sweater over it. Frank settled into his lawn chair, a beer resting on the little folding table beside him, a half-wrapped present in his lap. The wrapping paper sagged over the edge, and every time he tried to cut a straight line, it curled back at him like it was offended. He frowned at the box, then at the tape. You'd think after 40 Christmases I'd figure this out. Harry was at the workbench, same as always, a Budweiser sweating next to his elbow. He had a piece of wood clamped down and was rubbing sandpaper over it in slow, patient strokes. Sawdust dusted his flannel like snow. He glanced over. You're supposed to wrap the present, not fight it. It started it, Frank muttered. Hudson stepped into the garage, breath puffing in little clouds, Santa hat slightly off-center on his head. He held his phone, but didn't have it out in record mode yet. This was the part where he just watched. You need help? He asked. Frank tugged the paper up around the box and tried to fold one corner. It tore clean off. He held up the triangle of paper like a crime scene. I need brain surgery. Hudson laughed and pulled the roll toward him. Here, let me hold it, and he folded. Frank gave him space and grabbed the tape. Actual clear tape this time, not duct tape. You know, he said, your papa's dad used to wrap all his presents in the Sunday comics? Hudson's eyes lit up. For real. Every year, Frank said. Didn't believe in buying wrapping paper. Said it was a scam. He'd lay out the funny pages, tape them together, and you'd open up a race car or a pocket knife, and underneath would be Garfield complaining about Mondays. Harry snorted. Pop said, if they're going to tear it off in 5 seconds, I ain't spending money on it. Hudson grinned, folding the edge smooth. Honestly, that's genius. Frank smiled without quite realizing it. Your great-grandpa was a smart man. He went quiet a second too long. Hudson didn't say anything, just smoothed the paper, handed him the tape, and let him sit with whatever that silence was. Inside the house, something clanged, something beeped 3 times in a row, and then Diane's voice broke across the garage like a siren. If any of you think you're eating before I say so, I will put this ham in my car and drive away with it. Harry took a sip of beer. Sounds like the ham's done. Frank nodded. Or someone died. Could go either way. Inside the house, something clanged, something beeped 3 times in a row, and then Diane's voice broke across the garage like a siren. Footsteps crunched on the side of the house. A second later, a voice yelled before the body it belonged to actually appeared. Chris Mahez. Ricky rounded the corner in a red jacket that looked one wash away from disintegrating, flannel half-buttoned underneath, Santa hat tilted like it had given up. He was dragging a massive black trash bag that bumped over cracks in the driveway. He burst into the garage, bag thumping behind him. Ricky Claus has arrived. He announced. Diane poked her head out the door, cigarette already lit, eyes narrowing at the sight. You look like Santa's court-ordered cousin. Ricky pointed finger guns at her. Festive, court-ordered cousin. Hudson squinted at the trash bag. Is that your sack? Damn right it is, Ricky said. Amazon, baby. Frank eyed the bulging plastic. Why is it moving? It's not, Ricky said too fast. Hudson stepped back a little. Another set of footsteps approached, slower, crunching snow under bigger boots. Doug came around the corner, wrapped in a thick coat, gloved hands wrapped around a gas station fountain, drink big enough to bathe a toddler in. The clear lid was fogging. Merry Christmas, he said, taking a sip. Ricky leaned forward and sniffed. What's that? Jet fuel. Holiday mix, Doug said. 5 sodas, 2 slushies, splash of coffee. Frank stared. You trying to meet Jesus before noon? You gotta commit to the vibe, Doug answered, completely serious. Hudson shook his head, smiling. Cheryl Ann appeared next, carefully navigating the icy patch at the corner. She carried a plastic tray of sugar cookies with red and green sprinkles that all slid to one side when she stepped. Sorry they're store-bought, she said immediately. Sorry, I burned the ones I tried to make. Sorry, I grabbed these last minute. Sorry. They look great, Frank said. They're perfect, Hudson added. Ricky grabbed 2. They smell like diabetes. I love them. Sorry, she said again under her breath. Anyway, a familiar fringe and guitar case came last. Marty drifted into the garage like he'd wandered in off a music video set, beanie pulled low, jacket tassels swinging. Afternoon, he said quietly. Happy Christmas Eve? Diane opened the inside door long enough to say, if you start seeing him before I've eaten, I'm unplugging you, then shut it again. I'll take that as love, Marty murmured. The patio heater hummed, pushing down heat. The string of old Christmas lights Frank had hung along the rafters blinked unevenly, a couple bulbs dark, a couple too bright. The little tree in the corner glowed soft and yellow, its crooked star hanging just a little to the left. Frank finished the present and handed it to Hudson. It looked rough, but recognizable. Not bad, Hudson said. Looks like a raccoon wrapped it, Harry offered. Then it fits this family, Frank replied. They drifted in and out of the garage, helping Diane in the kitchen when she would allow it and getting out of the way when she would not. At one point, Ricky volunteered to mash potatoes and nearly flung half the bowl onto the ceiling, which got him banned from the kitchen until next Thanksgiving. Doug tried to taste test the ham before it was sliced and nearly lost a hand. By the time the food was finally spread across the dining room table, the house smelled like ham, butter, sugar, and a dozen other things that didn't have names but all meant holiday when you put them together. They sat where they always sat. Frank at one side of the table, Hudson next to him, Diane at the head, tongs in hand like a scepter, Harry at the other end, watching everything with quiet amusement, Ricky across from Doug, which was naturally the loudest side of the table, Cheryl Ann beside Diane, looking like she was afraid to touch anything. Marty squeezed between Doug and Harry with the look of a man who'd been through real gigs and still found this table more interesting. They ate. The ham was perfect, the potatoes smooth, the green beans acceptable, the rolls were warm, the cinnamon rolls, the ones Diane insisted on making every year, were slightly scorched on the bottom. She glared at the pan. This oven's crooked. Been crooked since 1987. Ricky took a bite and made a face like he'd stepped on a tack. Adds crunch, he said brightly. Doug turned his over and squinted. Why's it shiny? Harry put his fork down long enough to say, puts hair on your chest. Your tongue puts lies in the world, Diane fired back. Hudson hid his smile behind his glass. After plates were scraped clean and Diane threatened anyone who tried to start dishes before at least one cigarette, they migrated back out to the garage for presents. The heater had warmed the concrete enough that it didn't bite through their socks. Larson had relocated from the middle of the floor to the new star of the room, the boneless couch. Ricky had insisted on bringing it in before presents. With Doug's help, he wrestled the thing out of the trash bag and plopped it in front of the TV. It sprawled across the floor like a giant, beige slug. Frank stared. Ricky, what is that? It is, Ricky said dramatically, hands out a couch. With no bones. Hudson blinked. You bought a giant dog bed for people. You're welcome, Ricky said. I've seen it on Amazon. 5 stars. Somebody said they saw God when they sat in it. I figured Frank's garage needs that. Marty tested it by sitting down. The couch swallowed him whole. He sank, blinked, then smiled. Okay. I see the vision. Cheryl Ann perched nervously on the edge and immediately apologized to it. Sorry, couch. Sorry if I'm too heavy. Sorry, Doug poked the side. Feels like a memory foam biscuit. With everyone gathered, wrapping paper and bags were brought out from corners and under tables and from behind toolboxes where Frank thought he'd hidden them. Diane opened Harry's gift first, a small wooden sign, roughly carved but sanded smooth. Letters burned into it by hand. "Mama's Kitchen," she read aloud. "Complaints welcome, they'll be ignored." She stared at it just long enough for everyone to worry. Then her lip twitched. Could have used glitter. Harry took a sip of beer. Didn't have glitter in the budget. She carried it back inside and set it by the kitchen doorway without comment. Hudson handed Frank a flat, carefully wrapped package. The corners were perfect. That was how Frank knew Diane helped. He tore back the paper and found a framed photo, a screen grab from the Thanksgiving night stream. He was mid-laugh, head thrown back, eyes squinted, while Hudson stood behind the phone rig, grinning. The garage glowed behind them, warm and cluttered and exactly right. "Thought you might want to hang it up," Hudson said, a little shy. Frank stared at it longer than necessary, then cleared his throat and nodded. "That's a perfect gift." His voice dipped. "Thanks, son." He passed Hudson a slightly crooked box with too much tape. Inside was a new microphone, one Hudson had been eyeing online for months but never assumed would show up. Hudson's face lit up. "For real? For your videos?" Frank said, like it wasn't a big deal. "Figure if you're gonna film us, looking stupid, oughta at least sound good." Ricky took that as his cue. "Okay," he shouted, standing up a little too fast. "You all have nice little gifts, but none of you are ready for what Ricky Claus has brought to this family." "Lord," Diane muttered. Ricky grabbed the trash bag and ripped it all the way open, sending a shower of cheap wrapping paper and some questionable packing peanuts onto the floor. Underneath was the boneless couch, fully expanded. We already saw it," Hudson said. "Yeah," Frank added. "You brought it in, remember? Made a whole announcement." Ricky blinked. No. That was a preview." He slapped the top of it. "This is your present, Frank. For the garage. For the gang. For all of us. Your official garage couch." Frank looked at it again. Looked at the heater. Looked at the TV. Looked at Larson, who had already waddled up and tested the corner of it with his paw, like it might disappear. He sat down slowly, feeling the foam give way under him, wrapping around his shoulders and back. He sank and stopped and stayed. He exhaled. "Hell, it's actually comfortable." "Right," Ricky shouted. "You're welcome." Larson took that as permission and climbed up beside him, turning in a circle twice before plopping down, head on Frank's thigh. Frank scratched his ear. "Yep, he approves." Presents continued. Doug passed out gas station scratch-offs instead of cards. Marty gave everyone burned CDs with garage mics and his handwriting on them. Sherilyn offered homemade coupon books for rides to town or watching Larson when Frank needed a night out. At one point, while Ricky was arguing with Doug about whether slushies counted as a holiday beverage, Hudson leaned back against the boneless couch, looked over at his dad, and said quietly, "You always do a good job, Dad." "With what?" Frank asked. "Christmas, the garage, all this." He gestured around. "Feels like a real thing, not just a day." Frank shrugged, looking down at his beer. "I try not to screw it up too bad." "You don't," Hudson said. The evening stretched the way good ones do. The heater hummed. The snow outside thickened but never turned nasty. Marty finally picked up his guitar and started quietly picking out melodies between conversations. Diane came out with a plate of leftover ham slices and set it on the workbench like a peace offering. She sat on an old stool, lit a cigarette, and complained about Christmas specials replacing her normal shows. Harry listened, throwing in just enough disagreement to keep her talking. Ricky eventually sprawled across the far end of the boneless couch, one arm over his face, muttering every few minutes that this was the best purchase he'd ever made. Doug found a way to lean against the couch while still clutching his drink. Cheryl Ann took it upon herself to gather up the shredded wrapping paper, muttering sorry every time she stepped near someone's feet. As the night fully settled, the overhead lights felt too bright. Frank got up, flipped one switch off, so only the string of Christmas lights, the little tree, the TV, and the heater glowed. The garage softened, felt smaller, closer. He walked over to the small shelf where an old Bluetooth speaker sat, thumbed through his phone for a second, and hit play. A gentle guitar line floated through the room. Steel, slow, familiar. George Strait's voice drifted in a moment later, low and warm on an old Christmas song. Harry looked up from his beer. Pop loved this one. Frank didn't say anything at first. He just sat back down on the boneless couch, whiskey now in his hand instead of beer. He took a slow sip. Hudson watched him more than he watched the TV. "Tell me about him," Hudson said quietly. "Your grandpa?" For a second, Frank considered deflecting, making a joke, switching to something safe. Instead, he gripped the glass and let the words find their way. "He was my best friend," Frank said. "I mean, I had friends. I had your mama and papa, but my grandpa's my best friend. We talked on the phone almost every night when I was a kid, especially Sundays. Race days. George Strait sang about old times and quiet nights. The heater hummed like backup. He didn't live close," Frank went on. "A couple hours away. But he'd watch the races on TV or listen on the radio, then call me. We'd break down every lap like it mattered. Talk about pit strategies like we were in charge. He'd say, 'One of these days, Frank, they're going to be talking about you on there.'" Hudson listened, eyes locked on his dad. "Every Christmas," Frank said, staring at nothing. "He'd send me one little die-cast car, every single year. Stock cars, late models, sometimes weird, random brands I'd never heard of. I'd line them up on my dresser like my own little field of dreams." He smiled a little. "My favorite was this black number 26. Didn't belong to any big series, just some short track somewhere. He circled it in the catalog one year and wrote, 'This one feels like you.'" Harry shifted on his stool, watching his son with an expression you didn't see on his face often. Something proud, something sad, something like he was seeing two timelines at once. "He talked about you all the time," Harry said softly. "Told everybody at Maggie's his grandson was going to be a driver. Said you had the brain of a crew chief and the heart of a wheelman." Frank huffed out a breath that was almost a laugh. "Yeah, well, life had different ideas." He took another sip, jaw tight. Hudson hesitated, then asked, "You miss him a lot?" "Yeah," Frank said. No hesitation that time. Every day. Holidays. Extra. The little tree in the corner flickered. One bulb sputtered out and then came back to life, like it had changed its mind. Hudson looked at it. That was his. Frank followed his gaze. "Yeah," he said quietly. "That was his tree. He had it in his living room as long as I can remember. Same little crooked thing. Same cheap lights. When he passed or Papa asked if there was anything I wanted, I took that." Hudson swallowed. "Why?" "Because..." Frank stared at it, eyes shining just a little in the low light. He always said Christmas didn't need to be big. Just needed to be honest. That tree was him. No fancy, no show. Just there, every year. Like clockwork. He paused, working his mouth like he was deciding how much to let out. "When we plug it in out here, feels like he's sitting in the corner watching us. Barrington the Cowboys, critique when your mama's cinnamon rolls, telling me I should have gone into racing, and I'd tell him, they don't put guys like me on TV. And he'd say, then they're missing out." George Strait's chorus swelled, just enough to frame the quiet. Harry spoke up. "He'd be proud of you, son, regardless of life's outcome." "For what?" Frank asked. "I never got near a real car. I didn't make it past watching races on TV with a beer in my hand." Hudson shook his head. "For this? For us? For this garage? For keeping something good alive?" Frank's eyes flicked up to his son, then back to the tree, then to Harry at the workbench, then across to Ricky and Doug half asleep on the couch. Marty humming along to the song under his breath, Cheryl Ann drowsy in a folding chair, Diane just inside the doorway with a coffee mug and cigarette in hand, watching it all like she was pretending not to. He let his shoulders drop a little. Maybe. He said. Harry lifted his Budweiser in a small salute. He'd be damn proud. Don't care what anybody says. Frank raised his whiskey glass halfway in return. George Strait kept singing about old-time Christmas. Larson shifted in his sleep and pressed closer to Frank's leg. Ricky snorted himself awake just long enough to mumble, "Love y'all," before drifting off again. Hudson leaned his head lightly on his dad's shoulder. Frank wrapped his arm around him. "Your grandpa was your best friend," Hudson said softly, "but I'm glad I got the job after him." For a second, Frank's throat betrayed him. A tightness sat there, threatening to show itself. He took a slow breath, stared at the little tree in the corner, and swallowed it down the way he'd learned to do with a lot of things in his life. "You're doing all right," he said. "Don't get cocky." Hudson smiled. "Yes, sir." The heater hummed. The snow kept falling. The little tree glowed, stubborn and steady. The garage, Frank's garage, held them all in one warm, imperfect, honest little world. It wasn't racing under bright lights. It wasn't a grandstand chanting his name. But sitting there with his boy, his parents, his people, beers and weird sodas, and George Strait playing low, Frank figured this was about as close as he could get to a victory lane. He took one last sip of whiskey and let the warmth sit. "Merry Christmas," he said quietly, mostly to the tree. "You'd VA liked this one, Grandpa." Then he leaned back into the boneless couch, let the music wash over him, and watched the old lights on the little tree blink like they were nodding along. One night of laughter, cold beer, and old memories settling in. One small tree holding a story only Frank and Papa understood. One Christmas that hit a little deeper than the rest. This was Christmas at Frank's place. This was life at Frank's place.
Well, if you made it all the way to the end, either you really liked the story, or your phone fell asleep before you did. Either way, I appreciate you. For the full Frank's Place episodes, previews, and miniseries, follow us on Facebook. That's where all the chaos lies. And for the full audiobook versions, subscribe to the Frank's Place YouTube channel, where the stories run longer than Harry's one-liners. This is Life at Frank's Place.